You are Locked On Wolverines, your daily podcast on the Michigan Wolverines, part of the Locked On Podcast Network.
Happy Tuesday. We are back and doing it. Locked On Wolverines podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it is your team every day. I'm your man on the ground, Isaiah Hole, publisher of Wolverines Wire through USA Today Sports Media Group, and I'm here despite... It's very weird to say. We are in week 9. It's a rivalry week. I don't really feel like there's a heck of a lot to talk about. It's a very weird thing, especially because this rivalry has gotten to be so bizarre in the sense of now that there's no D'Antonio and it's Mel Tucker, there's not a heck of a lot of crazy, amazing sound bites. Right? The big soundbite coming out of Jim Harbaugh on Monday was him talking about James Franklin, talking about the last week. And we've already addressed that. So this is going to be kind of one of those, because I just started looking through things and I'm just sitting there trying to figure out what are we going to talk about. So it'll be one of those things where we'll kind of just navigate as we go. But I mean, we'll start out with the one topic that I just wrote about, which is we had a couple players today, Blake Corum, Makari Page, and Cornelius Johnson. And I asked all three, I said, how do you guard against overconfidence when you're going into a game like this, right? Because you look at the records, you look at, and no one's impervious to this, right? You look at the records and you see that you're a 22-point favorite. I mean, all that kind of stuff. It's hard, I think, when you think at least in if you're in our shoes and you're looking at this game, it's easy to just sit there and say well, that game is in the bag. But I mean, they have to go out and play the game, right? And there's a lot of factors that could come to play. What if Michigan doesn't have a good game plan? And meanwhile, Michigan State doesn't have a good game plan. What if the team does come out overconfident and think that, okay, all we have to do is show up, right? I think that played a part in Ohio State's loss to Michigan last year. I think that Michigan went in feeling we can beat these guys, and Ohio State was we just have to show up and they'll bow down. I think that certainly played a part. That plays a part, I think, in any type of upset, right? Is the favorite thinking, we just have to show up, do what we do. Hey, we're Michigan. I think in 2020, that was a big part of it, right? I think that Michigan came into the game being hey, we're Michigan. We just beat Minnesota. Did you see us beat Minnesota the way that we just did? I mean, come on, we're one of the best teams in the country. Everyone is telling us how good we are. And Michigan State, you just lost to Rutgers. I think Michigan State was no, we see something on. See, we know what we can exploit. Now, you weren't very good at covering the receivers against Minnesota, so we're just going to exploit that over and over again. So this Michigan team says hey, we know that there's a borderline deal. We're going into this confident. We want to dominate them, but we aren't taking it for granted. And that's the right attitude to have. But I mean, you can say that, right? You can say it all you want. They have to go out there and show it. The good news is since that game, really last year, I can't go all the way back to 2020 because I mean the rest of that season was not good. The competition, I think, that Michigan played before Michigan State probably wasn't up to par. Obviously, the wins at Wisconsin and Nebraska were big. They had never won at Nebraska. They hadn't won at Wisconsin in 20 years. But I still think that they went in that Michigan State game a little overconfident, right? And that also goes for the coaching staff. But I think the good news is by being humbled 2 years in a row, also knowing that there's probably no room for error this year like there was last year, right? Ohio State already had a loss. Michigan State, I think everyone, except for me, actually, I don't think I called officially. I thought Michigan State probably could lose to Purdue. I don't think I actually called it when it came to time to predict that game. But it's one of those things where I I think that Michigan got humbled in a way, and it's taken things in a very different direction ever since then. It probably didn't necessarily feel like that in the aftermath. Like they sat there and talked about how they dominated Indiana, and it was like, okay, you won like 33-7. That doesn't really feel like some kind of insane domination. That just feels like a ho-hum win. But you have to keep in mind, Michigan plays a different brand of football, right? They aren't trying to Ohio State everybody. They're not trying to win 50 to something against every team. It was that in the first 3 games, but that's not necessarily how they're trying to win every game. I think they learned some valuable lessons. I guess the question is going into this game is twofold. Will these players be able to go out there and recognize, because I don't think that this Michigan State team is necessarily as lifeless as the 2019 one. I think it was very close to being that, but I don't think it is. Can this Michigan team go out there, impose its will? And in part, it's the game plans for either team, right? But it's also in part just the physical aspect of the game. Michigan's got to treat this the same way it treated Penn State. Physically imposing its will on both fronts. I think Michigan obviously has the pieces to be able to do that. It's just a matter of them actually going out there and doing it. All right, this is going to be a shorter episode, I think, because, like I said, it's a weird week. I don't feel like there's not a lot of crazy, amazing storylines to talk about. It's all kind of the same stuff. You know, Michigan should win. It should win convincingly. And every week it feels like, you know, you get past one opponent and it's kind of like, all right, well, now it's tough for a different reason, you know. The same way as like going into Iowa. It's like, oh, well, Michigan should win, but what if? And then you get past them, and then Indiana, it's like, yeah, Michigan will beat Indiana. Oh, but that place has been a weird place every time that I've gone there, except for one game. What if? And then they get through it. Oh, Penn State. Yeah, I think Michigan will beat Penn State, but what if? What if they are legit? They might be still. We'll know more. All right, let's actually keep talking about that. That's where I want to take this. But before we do move on, listen, as everyone knows, athletes rise and fall in the ranks, but when it comes to saving money, SimpliSafe always stays on top. And right now, you can save big with SimpliSafe Home Security. They're giving listeners 40% off their advanced security system. SimpliSafe was just named the best home security of 2022 by U.S. News. I use it. I love it. You'll love it too, because it's SimpliSafe. Your safety is the only thing that matters. With professional 24/7 professional monitoring, when a threat is detected, SimpliSafe's monitoring professionals promptly contact you and dispatch first responders to your home, even if you're away or unable to respond. 24/7 professional monitoring costs less than $1 a day. That's less than half the cost of ADT's traditional professional installed plans. SimpliSafe blankets your home with protection and advanced sensors for every room, window, and door. HD security cameras for inside and outside your home. Smarter ways to detect motion that will only alert you when a threat is real. And even hazard sensors that instantly detect fires, floods, and other threats to your home. Our monitoring experts use proprietary response technology to visually confirm whether a break-in is real, so you can get the highest priority police dispatch. Don't miss this chance to save big when you protect your home with the best. Get 40% off your order when you visit simplisafe.com/lockedoncollege today. Customize the perfect system. I cannot speak today for your home in just a few minutes. That's simplisafe.com/lockedoncollege. Go today. There's no safe like SimpliSafe. This episode of Locked On Wolverines is brought to you by Sling TV. Sling is something for everyone, especially when it comes to college football coverage. With a massive lineup of games across the ACC, Big Ten, Pac-12, and SEC, I can always catch the games I want on Sling, and now you can too. Check out Sling TV now to see the massive lineup of games they have all season long. Sling, the TV you love for a price you love. Try it today. All right, let's continue talking about some of these other things, these superfluous scenarios. Because like I said yesterday, I'm not 100% sold on Ohio State. I think we learned a bit about Penn State. Now, the question is how much better is Penn State with Tanner Morgan compared to Kaliak-Manis being the guy who led the charge for Minnesota? I'm not sure, because, I mean, there's been a lot of games where Tanner Morgan does next to nothing and their run game just goes off. That's generally been the case the last couple of years. Penn State just absolutely dominated them. It's not a night game in Happy Valley, but it's a big-time environment, and Ohio State's going into it. Unlike Iowa, because I don't think that you can sit there and celebrate how good your defense is against Iowa at this moment. I mean, I don't have a good analogy, and nothing that wouldn't get me canceled. But it's you just, that's not something you can really brag about, is how good the defense was against Iowa this year, right? Like Michigan didn't actually have a great defensive game against Iowa outside of the pass rush. But you look at what Iowa did, come on. Fun with the computer sometimes. It just is like, yeah, no, I'm not clicking here. So when it comes to what Ohio State did against Iowa, okay, they held them to their second lowest output of the season. Michigan was actually the second worst defensive performance against Iowa of the season, just a notch above Rutgers. But Ohio State held them to 158 yards. Iowa State held them to 150. All right. They did hold them to the lowest yards per play. Michigan gave up the second most. So, if anything, yeah, maybe that doesn't look that great. But you also have to take into account what was happening in the game. Now, home game for Iowa versus a road game, and Michigan did have some breaks defensively late. They still held them out of the end zone on one occasion when they marched down the field, but they found ways to be able to drive the field 3 times against Michigan. And they didn't really do that against Ohio State. So that is a credit to Ohio State. But you do also have to look in the fact of how each team plays the game, because not every team plays the same. And I know we talked about this on Monday, but it's not every team plays the same type of game. Ohio State goes out there with a quasi air raid. It's not actually the air raid, but that's kind of like the mentality of what they're trying to do. And sometimes it doesn't work. And for about 2/3 of the game against Iowa, it didn't work. Michigan offensively sliced through that Iowa defense like butter, doing what it wanted to do when it wanted to do it, occasionally shot itself in the foot. But essentially, I mean, the first drive just marched right down the field, got a touchdown like it was no big thing. Ohio State did not have that ability. I only bring this up again, even though we talked about it on Monday, because I think Penn State is more built to be able to stop Ohio State than Iowa is, for in large part complementary football. Iowa has a really good defense, of course. I mean, yes, they gave up 54 points. It's like the most in the Kirk Ferentz era. They gave up, but I mean, Ohio State still only, I mean, with all of that, got 54 points with only managing 360 total yards on the day. So, I mean, Michigan was about that, right? Like 327. And sometimes it's all about complementary football. If Iowa's offense could have marched the field a couple times and the defense wouldn't have been put into some really bad situations often, and that dam wouldn't have broken. So I am curious to see. I still think Ohio State will beat Penn State, and I think it will probably beat it by 2 scores or more, personally. But I am curious to see what Penn State's able to do in this game. This is the first real, like, adverse place that Ohio State's going, in the sense of traveling, going to an adverse environment. I don't necessarily think it equates to wins all the time, right? James Franklin would have to really suddenly become a much different coach. But if Penn State can run the ball and keep Ohio State off kilter while stopping Ohio State's run, because I think stopping Ohio State's run is paramount, then things become interesting. If Ohio State can go in there and just kind of do whatever it wants against them, kind of the same way Michigan did against Penn State, then maybe I'll change my mind, and I think that Ohio State will easily roll Michigan. I don't know that it will be easy regardless. So I'm really curious to see that game, and I'm really excited about the fact that that game is a noon game with Michigan and Michigan State being a night game, because you can actually watch both of them. It's pretty rare to be able to do that. Excuse me. So I think we'll learn a lot, but at the same time, don't necessarily learn everything, right? If you sat there and tried to tell anybody that Michigan was going to roll Ohio State the way they did at this time last year, you would have been laughed out of town. You would have been laughed at anywhere, right? And yet it happened. So again, the matchup thing is really important. The style of play is really important. And having complementary football is also really important. And I think that's one thing that Ohio State is maybe getting closer to having with a better defense. But I don't think that they have been necessarily tested offensively by really anyone, right? Like, and I know we've talked about this before. But yes, they have a really good offense, and right now they have a really good defense. And I think they've faced some really good defenses. Obviously, they faced Iowa, who's got a really good defense. But Penn State is among the best offenses that they'll have faced. 49th in the country. That actually might be the best offense that they have faced to this point, now that I look at it. So that's going to be interesting, because I don't think that you can sit there and brag about Iowa. It's the 131st in the country from an offensive standpoint. But I think we'll learn a lot. All right, let's move on. Let's get back to Michigan. I know we're talking some rivalry stuff because it apparently there's not enough about Michigan State. I don't have any weird insights to be like, oh, here it is. This is the thing. Anyway, these days, every new potential hire can feel like a high stakes wager for your small business. You want to be 100% certain that you have access to the best qualified candidates available. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps find the right people for your team faster and for free. You could go to, right? It's so easy just to go to LinkedIn, add your job to LinkedIn Jobs. So just add your job, and then you can add the purple hashtag hiring frame to your LinkedIn profile to spread the word that you're hiring. Simple tools like screening questions make it easy to focus on candidates with just the right skills and experience, so you can quickly prioritize who you'd like to interview and hire. You want to finish the year strong, just like you want Michigan to finish the year strong, obviously. And guess what? The right team member will help you do that. That's why small businesses rank LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. So I was talking to a colleague at the press conference this evening, and one of the things that, because it just seems like a weird way, we've talked about this on the show a couple times, the personalities, it's funny because the team is better, right? But the personalities on the team, I don't know if it's just they're held back compared to some of the others, but it always seemed like there'd be 10 or 15 guys on the team where it's oh yes, we're getting this guy. I feel like there's only 2 on this team. JJ, and who else? I mean, yeah, it's exciting. We got Blake Corum tonight, but I don't think that there's nothing where it's oh yeah, Blake Corum's going to say something that I'm going to be super excited to write about. It's not like Chase Winovich was, or Jordan Lewis, or Jabril Peppers. There used to just be guys that was just you knew you had 4 or 5 things. So it's one of those interesting things where it's especially on a week like this week, I just feel like you're hearing I feel like you're hearing all of the absolute baseline type stuff. And I think that's also by design. I mean, Cornelius Johnson, we talked to him this evening, and he said, like, yeah, we know about this bulletin board stuff, and, you know, this idea is to obviously not create any. And they've gone a long way to not do that outside of Donovan Edwards on the radio show last week, or I guess Jamon Green. Jamon Green would be one where I think, like, he's going to say some provocative things here and there, and he's going to become that type of guy. You know, he's going to say some things that are like, ooh, I can't wait to write that. It's not necessarily about being provocative, but I just think that this team is so focused on football. And that's, in a lot of ways, it might correlate to the reason why this team is actually more successful than, say, the 2016 team or the 2018 team. Right? It's you've got guys that this is all they care about. It's not necessarily about having that great sound bite. It's not about going out there and really impressing people. It's just about going out there, and it's kind of like the media is an obligation. We just want to focus on football. I don't think that was necessarily the case years ago. And this team does seem like really ultimately a really strong, cohesive culture. I don't think that was the case in 2018 or 2016 even. I think 2016 was probably the closest they had to having a cohesive culture. But I feel like right now it really is like Cornelius said, not today, you said it before, it is very the Three Musketeers, you know, all for one and one for all. I think that really is the case in this team, and I think that's a large part of why they win and why this team is better. The culture is so much better off. I do want to remind you of the conversation that I had after Pep Hamilton left Michigan with him, and when he had said, one of the differences between Ohio State and Michigan is that Ohio State had guys that really needed football. Michigan had guys that just liked football. Now, I don't think that Michigan necessarily has guys that need football per se, but I do think they have guys that live and breathe football and work and all of those things in ways that they haven't had. You know, it is a big difference between the guys who would come in and would be like, you know what, if this doesn't work out, I've got my Michigan degree, I've got all kinds of other things. I think these guys that they have on the team at the moment are like, we are going to go all in as hard as we can, as long as we can, and we'll see where that takes us. And I think that is a really important cultural difference. And it paid off last year. We'll find out if it pays off this year. Certainly, they didn't necessarily need the bulletin board material for Ohio State ultimately, but after winning the Big Ten championship, they all pointed to, they gave us 1% chance to win the Big Ten. You can only use the bulletin board material so much, as Cornelius Johnson said it. Like, that doesn't really decide the factor. But I still wonder, when they sit there and see every bowl projection coming out, and they're projected to the Rose Bowl while Ohio State's projected to the playoff, how much more does that push them? That's where it can help, is in that climb, it can push you to that next level. So I'm curious to see how this team comes out and plays this week against Michigan State, because I think that will be somewhat telling. How it continues to ascend, because I thought we had a really good tell last year against Maryland in the climb. You know, Penn State, tough game. They got through it. They won the game. They found a way to win. Important. They needed it. Felt like a big win. They responded the next week by going in face of what could always be a dangerous Maryland team, went on the road, and absolutely decimated them. It's going to be harder this year to do that, because I think the teams on the back end of the schedule, even though Michigan should win them all, I don't think they're all going to be easy. But I'm curious to see if there is that same climb, because the execution really seemed to just increase. And the big thing was finishing in the red zone, because they started to finish in the red zone, and there was a correlation between that and obviously they didn't settle for field goals against the likes of Ohio State and Iowa. They need to find a way to not settle for field goals against Michigan State, against Illinois, and against Ohio State. If you're settling for field goals against Ohio State, you're pretty much already lost. So I'm really curious to see what this team does with everything. Really, this back end of the season starts now. And it's crucial that they figure out how to get from where they've already been to that next level. All right. That's going to do it for us today. Tomorrow, it's going to be a late episode-ish, no later than today. But we will have Mike Golick Jr. joining us to discuss these last 5 games. I don't know. At least this next game. I don't know why I'm just trying to say, let's do the last 5 games. But his expectations versus what has happened and what we saw last week, what we're going to see this week, all that kind of stuff. So we'll bring him on, ask him about some of these other teams as well. Anyway, that's going to do it for us today. Thank you for watching and or listening. We will talk to you again soon. Peace.